Hey gentlefolk, my name is Malte Krug. Welcome back to another episode of All About Keys. This will be the second and final part of the feature about the Ensoniq Mirage sampler, which has been a big surprise at the time of release. Due to its low price compared to other sampling systems of the day, has been a major success and gave a lot more keyboard players the possibility of producing those new and modern sounds. If you missed the first part, you should watch it now. Just click here to learn about the basics of this machine and to hear some of the sounds. And then come back. Today I will go deeper into technical details of the handling of the Mirage, which sometimes doesn't take you by the hand, like its successors did when you wanted to make your own samples. I'll get to those quirks a little later. But first, as usual in the series, we are going to check out the content of 1985's July issue of the German KB-Magazin. If you want to go directly to the technical bits, jump here. So regular viewers know this already. Starting with the content list, letters to the editor, and a bit of news, which seem to be somewhat unremarkable, typical for the season, I guess. The sound börse contains sound patches sent in by readers, and this month some older analog machines are taken into account. The sound for the Yamaha CS5 is called Storm, and down here for the SH101 it says Bass a la Weather Report. Followed by two artist interviews, the first with Paul Fishman from Reflex, and the other one with Howard Jones, who really impressed me that year. Actually, exactly that month, with his piano-only version of Hide and Seek that he performed at Live 8. I still consider that one of the best days I completely wasted in front of a TV set. This month's giveaway is a rack-sized 8-channel mixer from Ibanez. This might have come pretty handy for managing the audio needs of a keyboard setup of the 80s. In contrast to the older issues, the workshop section is somehow divided in two. The home recording workshops are placed here in the beginning. The first one with the second part about peripheral gear, in this case equalizer, explaining the different types and in which cases they get used. The second workshop in this category, we get informed about balanced and unbalanced connections and how they work to eliminate unwanted noise when connecting equipment or microphones to a desk or similar. Ground hum and how to avoid it is also mentioned, together with a warning never to cut the ground wire in a power connection to get rid of hum, and that is something that can't be said often enough. And here comes the first test. The Yamaha DX21 is Yamaha's successor to the DX9 from 1983. Yamaha added a lot more sound memory slots, 128 in ROM and 32 RAM, compared to the DX9's puny 20. If you want to know more about the DX9, check out my video about it here. Two things the DX21 contained, which even its larger brother lacked, is a stereo chorus, and the ability to play two sounds at the same time, stacked or as a keyboard split. Its keyboard is still not velocity sensitive, but at least the DX21 reacts to incoming dynamics from an external, more capable MIDI keyboard. On this side we have the rather short second part of the Mirage test with mostly warmed up technical specs. This might be because they only had the chance to take a brief look at the sampler at a music shop nearby. I guess these sold faster than anyone could have imagined, so that even magazines would have to wait longer for a unit to dig their teeth in. This here is not a test, but a feature about the PPG Wave 2.3. Definitely a classic hybrid synthesizer, and together with the Waveform sampler unit and the other PPG equipment, one of the big systems of the 80s, which were unobtainium for us regular mortals then. Followed by a feature about some more traditional genre of instruments, the 100 years anniversary of the Schimmel piano manufacture. Here you can find a detailed chronicle of their century of piano building. Other than the other big piano factory in the city of Braunschweig, Grotrian-Steinweg, where I learned the craft, Schimmel is still around. Unfortunately, Grotrian-Steinweg had to close about half a year ago when the Chinese investors stopped the cash flow. Back to tests and electronics. The QX7 is the second MIDI sequencer in Yamaha's portfolio and is aiming at the lower priced market, compared to the massive QX1 flagship sequencer, which I played with in this video, by the way. The QX7 sports the same desktop form factor as the TX7, which is basically the DX7's MIDI expander version. Here you can see them both on top of each other. The TX7 has basically the same possibilities as the DX7, but adds individual function parameter memory space for each sound. But that's not all. There's an additional bank of 32 function parameter memories that the TX7 dumps to a MIDI-connected DX7 as soon as you call up a sound. So your DX7 could get that functionality through the backdoor when using both units together. The second MIDI sequencer tested in this magazine comes from Roland and is the MSQ100, the smaller brother of the older MSQ700. Somehow in the day I never worked with Roland sequencers, but I will show some successors of this when they will be presented in this magazine in the future. And now for something really modern, right? A presentation of 4 DX7 software editors for the Commodore C64. In the intro, they are explaining this new concept and why it actually works using these new ominous system-exclusive data through MIDI. The necessary hardware and the setup of it gets a schematic, and here they are. 2 of these companies you might have heard of because of their later products. Steinberg hit big a few years later with Cubase on the Atari ST and is still going strong with this product family on modern computers. C-Lab's creator and notator MIDI sequencers for the ST were Steinberg's competitor at the end of the 80s. It evolves into what you now know as Apple Logic. Yellinghaus, by the way, I mentioned in earlier videos, because they made a DX7 hardware programmer. Speaking of MIDI software sequences, on this double page is a presentation of all then available MIDI recording softwares, and one can find some big names among this as well. Most of these are for the C64, but Yamaha of course released these 2 for their own system, the CX5M computer. For more details about that machine, check out this video. And this curiosity was also available, a keyboard to put on top of a C64. The included software allows you to play the internal sound chip with 3 notes of polyphony. I actually remember seeing this in a shop. It's just a toy. And here we get the second bunch of workshops at the end of the magazine. Lessons with notation for classic piano and jazz piano. Followed by part 3 of Hubertus Ma's DX7 programming workshop. He explains the structure of this popping bass sound and how to achieve the combination of the 3 parts he wants to include in it. Here's the datasheet as usual. More basic knowledge about music theory, this time an explanation about 11 chords. Then a workshop about piano grooves, and for drum computers we learn about reggae. The magazine ends with 3 pages of small ads, and I said it before, in later years this has been my starting point reading each issue. But now back to the Mirage and how to actually sample with it. You already know my Mirage rack from last month's video, and today I will show you how to do basic sampling, followed by multi-sampling a drum set and then using sampled synthesizer 1-cycle waveforms to program some sounds with the Mirage synthesizer possibilities, like filters, envelopes and so on. Followed by some tips for achieving better results with the help of output gear or clever tricks. The latter might fall a bit short depending on the final length of this video. But first, a little overview of the signal flow of the Mirage's 8 voices. As you can see, it's not so different to what most people were used to even in the day, or now. We have a 2-oscillator structure going through an amp and a filter, which each have their own envelope. It's an AP-DSR envelope. And the unfamiliar P stands for peak, and is the level to which the attack rises to before the decay leads to the sustain level. Except for the decay, all envelope sections can be independently influenced by the keyboard velocity. The filters, by the way, are of a regular analog 4-pole low-pass type with resonance. But let's see the machine now. I'm using a MASOS disk for booting the Mirage. The so-called Mirage Advanced Sampling Operating System has a few more quite handy features when it comes to making your own samples compared to the original OS. For example, it activates sysx data for the Mirage, so it can be programmed using a computer editor, and there already used to be one in 1985 for the Apple II computer. Here's a page of the Mirage editor in modern MIDI-Quest. The color scheme is a bit weird, but it can be useful to back up programs and wave samples onto the computer. The Mirage automatically dumps all this data after it loaded an instrument. Then you would need MASOS to be able of using this external filter module. This is not a filter for sound design. It allows for a higher sample rate of up to 50 kHz instead of the regular internal maximum of 29.4. Of course it reduces sample time, but you might want to use the better sound quality. I'll show the difference later. It gets plugged into the expansion port on the back. Later Mirages lack this port. Here's a list of useful commands that get added with MASOS and can come quite handy when juggling sampling data or do some cleaning up. What you lose though is the sequencer. But if you really need it, and I think nobody really does, or you like to listen to the sound demos on the sound disks, just boot the machine with a regular Mirage OS 3.2 and load the sounds you made with MASOS. They're compatible. Now for the memory structure of the Mirage. I will try to keep this as understandable and brief as possible, but you have to wait with me through this to get the best out of this sampler. And I want to show you how better and easier we got it since. The sample memory of the Mirage is divided in two banks of 64 kilobytes, which results in 2 seconds of sampling time in each bank when using the best sample rate. These two banks, called upper and lower bank, are also divided into 256 so-called pages, with a size of 256 bytes or samples each. One page is the shortest possible length of a loop, or a sample, which will result in another problem I will tell you about later. Before you start sampling, you have to decide what you want to sample, how many samples you actually need, and how long they are going to be. For using a raw synth waveform, you will only need one sample, and then the recording process is pretty straightforward and you just hit record and fill the memory. If you want to record longer than 2 seconds in one piece, there's a parameter called sample time. This extends available recording time by reducing the sample rate and of course the sound quality. There's a table in the manual which value means which rate. But when it comes to multi-sampling of up to 8 samples into each bank, like for a drum set with bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat and cymbals for example, it can get a bit confusing for us modern users. For these individual samples, memory needs to manually be allocated inside the banks, so that the Mirage knows where to record them into its memory. Unlike more modern samplers, it doesn't do that for you. Recording a bass drum, cutting it to size, then you record the snare drum and the sampler just appends the recorded data behind the first one in memory? That's not how it works here. After switching into multi-sampling, you have to structure the available memory first. The aforementioned drums are relatively short, but for a crash cymbal you might need more space. I know, this sounds complicated and I only mention it to you so you get a better insight of the innards of the Mirage. And luckily, there's a little workaround to this. There are templates on the mother's disk that already divide the memory space of each bank into either 2, 4 or the maximum of 8 samples and add basic program parameters like velocity. So listen to this.
1, 2,
3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
1, 2,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
The parts in memory are all of the same size, but nobody forces you to load the 8 sample template into the upper bank when you only want to record 2, like this.
One.
Actually, every instrument loaded off a sound disk can be used as a template. Just select a specific sample and record over it. If you're wondering why some of the number keypad buttons are yellow, with these you can switch between 4 programs of the same sampled instruments. Programs only contain variations of global sound parameters like the filter, LFO or the envelopes, while still using the same waveforms. It's comparable to patches in a regular synthesizer, which also uses the same waveforms to produce different sounds. I'll give you examples in a minute. Congratulations! You made it through the dry bit about the Mirage structure, and I hope I didn't hit you too hard with this broadside of technobabble. I'm afraid there is a bit more of that coming up, but it will be accompanied by some examples to listen to. Before working on a sample, you have to select it manually. Having a list of samples written down might come handy, and there are actual tables coming with a MASOS manual showing the details, plus a blank one for you to copy and fill out for your own creations. But our template samples already tell us which one they are.
1,
So, identification is quite easy. We select the lower bank sample number 1. The Mirage has its own unique way of defining keyboard zones for its samples. Of course it does. Per sample you can only define the top key of the keyboard zone using parameter 72. How do we get the lowest key of the zone? We don't. But we can define the top key of other samples, which then partially mask the first one. There's a hierarchy among the samples that the lower numbered samples will always mask higher numbers. So if I alter the top key of sample number 1 of the lower bank to higher numbers, it masks the other samples. Parameter 72, value 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keys are just numbered from 1 to 61, by the way. And if I alter that,
1 2
1 4 4 5
1
Samples 2 and 3 are masked now, which on one hand means that samples from the lower bank can be spread over the whole keyboard, like this. '61, top key.
1 1
1
1
The distinction of lower and upper is referring to the two halves of the memory and not necessarily the position on the keyboard. But it also means that we need a bit of planning concerning which sample will record into which slot. If you record low notes of an instrument first, while starting with waveform 1 and counting upwards, you should be fine. I'll now just record over the number samples to get my drum set. The drums come from the MR61. Choosing a sample rate, parameter 73, and value of 34. According to the table, that is the highest internal sample rate of 29.4 kHz. Other samplers normally would in conjunction automatically adjust the input anti-aliasing low-pass filter accordingly to avoid said aliasing, especially in higher registers. But the Mirage doesn't. Of course. You would have to do that manual as parameter 74. That might not be so important for material that doesn't get transposed like drums, but for other sounds you will have to listen in higher registers and decide for yourself. Maybe the harshness or raspy sound quality resulting from a technically standpoint unwanted frequencies are what you want for sound design. For now we leave the input filter frequency on default. I connected one aux output of my mixer to the Mirage sampling input because I want to use more than one sound source and I have to adjust the recording level at the source anyway. The Mirage can only switch between line and microphone level signals, but the internal preamp isn't very good, and I would recommend to use an external preamp anyway to get line level. Switching to mic level is parameter 75, and we already did. So here it is. No internal effects, just a bass drum. We hit sample lower, and after a few seconds we'll get these two dots, showing us that the Mirage is waiting for a signal and didn't shut down. A blank display will be irritating, I guess. Now we feed it the signal, and the display functions as a level meter. If the top row LEDs flicker, we have to reduce the level. After hitting enter again, the Mirage goes into standby, waiting for signal. It'll start sampling as soon as the signal level goes over a certain threshold. This threshold is adaptable with parameter 76, just in case something gets cut off at the beginning of the sample. Hear the metal ring on that snare? Will be gone. And here it is, we made our first sample in the Mirage. That sounds like as if the filter is already doing something. Let's check. Oh yeah, it is. So that sounds better. But it has a harsh ending. So let's see. Lower sample number 2. And I want to cut off the click ending, which means parameter 61, wave sample end. Let's cut off 3 or 4 pages. This is hexadecimal, by the way. And we won't hear an effect before we switch the loop on and off. That is the truncation command inside the Mirage for whatever reason. But let's save the lower sound, lower keyboard sound, parameter 11, just to be able to go back to the original. 61, wave sample end. I'll cut it short by 4 pages. 65 is the loop switch on, off. And then we cut off the harsh ending. And of course the result is not a CD quality copy, but that is exactly the point. Especially when we incorporate filters, etc. with other sounds later. You've seen the sampling process now. To spare you the boring repetition, I load the rest of the drum samples off disk. Here's the snare drum coming from the MR61, and I sampled it twice. Once through the internal input filter with a maximum sample rate of 29.4, and a second time through the external input filter with a maximum rate of 50 kHz. There we have them side by side. No filters or other parameters involved. Not that much of a difference, but a snare is mostly noise anyway. It might make more difference when you are sampling something tonal, like a piano or a guitar or something. While sampling, I checked out different cutoff frequencies for the input filters, and it is worth comparing the results. I also added a hi-hat and a crash cymbal in the upper half. One tip from the manual for better sampling results. They recommend using compressors, equalizers or whatnot to alter the sound you just sampled to your liking, and then patch that effects chain into the signal path between the original source and the Mirage input, and then sample the whole gamut again. I think that is something they did a lot with their later sounds from the factory library, but I didn't try this myself. Here we have our little drum set in mono through the single output of the Mirage. Parameter 69 is for adjusting the individual volume of the waveforms. Let's go for sample number 4, is the hi-hat, parameter 69. Sampling with effects and EQ doesn't sound like the worst idea, considering that we cannot do individual pimping of each drum sound, or we have to record them individually in a DAW, one after the other. Using a compressor could be helpful to even out the decay of a sound like the cymbal, which then makes it easier to find a loop. I would even try with this material. By the way, you will have to hold the key or a sustain pedal to get the sounds playing to the end. There's no one-shot mode like in later samplers. The amp envelope influences all samples the same way. Now let me show you the functionality of programs. To switch programs, you have to hit 0 first, and then the desired program number. We switch to 2, because I want to keep the raw version for comparison in program 1. Now let's go to parameter 36. And we alter the filter's cutoff frequency. But it changes all sounds. But maybe we only want to work on the bass drum or the snare. Filter is a global program function. There are 8 filters for the 8 voices of polyphony, but they are not tied to the wave samples. It's actually not different to a regular synthesizer. But we can influence the impact of the filter for each wave sample individually. Parameter 70 is for that. Relative filter frequency. Let's work on the snare. Parameter 70. So when I do that for the snare drum, for example, I can get rid of the effect entirely or lower the filter's impact. For that sample, for example, number 3. Now I will try to make a synthesizer sound out of a regular basic waveform. And what would be more appropriate than the sawtooth coming out of my Mini-Moog? I'm reloading the first template instrument from the MASOS disk, which prepares 2 samples for each bank.
1,
2,
1.
These are really of proper quality. The original sound from the Mini-Moog sounds like this. Selecting the first wave sample. We'll use the external filter again with 50 kHz of sampling frequency, because we'll only need one sample with a length of only 1 cycle, so lack of memory won't be an issue. Sample time adjust is doing that. Oh, and we're already on 50 kHz according to the table. Sample lower, enter. And there it is. Is the filter doing anything? Yes, it is. So the Mirage is too high, I have to tune it down. Or we could use a tuner.
2,
Oh, altering the top key to 61, so we got the whole keyboard. This is how it sounds unlooped in tune. Now I'm going to show you a problem with short loops on the Mirage. Switching on loop mode, parameter 65. On. This is a one-cycle loop at the end of the sample. Already mentioned it earlier, and I tried to keep it away from you as far as possible, but here in the display you can see that when it comes to memory, the Mirage counts in hexadecimal numbers, which are based on 16, not 10. That's why you see these weird numbers, 7E or 2C, etc. For getting a one-page long loop, the start and the end point address of your short loop need to be the same. In this case, it's 7E. The problem is that the pitch changes in the loop compared to the rest of the sample. That happens because we fit too much or not enough of a full cycle of that waveform we recorded into the 256 samples of one page. Unfortunately, it's not possible to tune the loop independently from the rest of the waveform like later samplers could. A workaround would be, especially when we work with synthesizer waveforms, to put the loop right at the beginning of the waveform. Then we can just tune the whole sample with parameters 67 and 68, because then there is no part of the sample before the loop that has a different pitch. That would sound like this. Loop start to the beginning of the sample, which should be 0, 0. And the loop end to 0, 0 as well. And the loop will start right at the beginning. But that won't help us when we want to sample a sound with a distinctive attack sound, like a guitar being picked or the breath noise of a flute, which then needs to be looped after that attack phase. The problem only occurs with single-page loops, by the way. Longer loops don't show this phenomenon. I will still use this example with a sawtooth to show you the procedure of how to avoid the detuning of the single-cycle loops, and this is going to sound a bit more complicated than it is, so bear with me. The problem lies again in technical inadequacies of the Mirage. What else? As indicated in this list in the manual, it's only able to use a certain number of different sample rates in the span between 10 kHz and 33 kHz without the external input filters, so we can't just dial in the sample rate that would be necessary to exactly fit the wavelength of, let's say, a single cycle of an A with 220 Hz into the 256 bytes of a page. I know, it sounds tedious, but stick with me. As you can see, we would need a sample rate of 28,160 Hz to achieve this. But the closest sample rate step that the Mirage can do is 28,571 Hz. So we have to change the pitch of the source instead. But at which pitch will one cycle of the resulting sound exactly fit into one page of 256 samples when using a sample rate of 28,571 Hz? That is easy to calculate using the rule of 3, if you lot remember that from school. I don't know why they just didn't add another column to the table in the manual with the resulting values, but here is how it's done. 28,160 is proportional to 220 Hz, like 28,571 is to the value x that we need. Just rearrange the numbers like this. You have to multiply 28,571 by 220 and then divide by 28,160, which will give us 223.2 Hz. So I'll use the tuner innuendo to pitch up the Minimoog accordingly. Now let's sample again. Select lower sample 1, we're fine. Lower. Level is fine. Enter. This is how it sounds in the... Switching on the loop is already at the end. Let's hear. Much better. There's still some weird click happening, and for these kind of samples I would prefer my workaround with a single cycle loop right at the start of the sample. Another recommendation, which I second from the manual, is to always work with recordings of the things you want to sample. You're free to alter pitch to whatever you want. I'm not sure if retuning a piano or a church organ is that practical, and it guarantees constant and reliable source levels. Plus, you don't want to record your friend playing a saxophone note by note, and in between takes he has to wait for you fiddling with the technology. Just get him playing all you need into a recorder, and then you deal with sorting out the results alone later. Thanks for staying with me this long. Now we finally get to some more fun bits, using the program parameters to actually make synthesizer patches. Of course, we can use the filter. Let's start with that one. And like everything in a synthesizer, it doesn't need to be static. For that, we got the filter envelope. That's parameter 41 for the peak. We're gonna rise that so the attack will have any effect. Let's put it on full blast, and the attack is parameter 40. Let's have a slower attack. And the release. With shorter release, we get rid of the hissy sound at the end of the note. And this is all memorized in programs. So whatever we do with another program, this is number 2, is the raw one we started with, but we can do more. Let's have some filter attack again, which is slow. Then we have to add the peak. Now we can add some resonance as well. And we can have a monophonic mode. Oh, I like some release on that as well. Filter release going down. I already did some other sounds sampling the Minimoog square wave. Seems like I like these filter envelopes. So, but we're going back to the saw wave, because I want to show you something that is actually nice. Because the structure of the Mirage is 2 oscillators per voice, not only one. We're only listening to one now, but there's a mode that is called mixed mode. And I can switch it on or off. If I switch it on, I can mix 2 different samples. But if mix mode is off, like it should be now, I can check. Mix mode is parameter 28, is off. Because when it's off, the Mirage is in chorus mode, which just means that it's actually already playing two samples, which is the same sample, at the same time. Now we're here in 1. If I use oscillator mix, which is parameter 34, and turn up the value, it's like a balance between the first and the second oscillator. I think it goes up to 63, so this should be somewhere in the middle. So we should have some phasing stuff. Because it's playing the same waveform twice with the same volume. But what else we can do is detuning these. So the detuning goes into car horn levels, but if you keep it subtle, like in around 10-ish, or you don't mix them 50-50, I think that's not too shabby. There's another tip from the manual, and they say if you have a pre-recorded sound source, play it half speed. And they don't mean the modern version of time stretching and maintaining pitch. Use the old-fashioned way, where speed and pitch are connected. Half speed means it's also going to be played pitch down an octave. This uses up double the memory, but the Mirage will take more samples per waveform cycle, so when you transpose it back up inside the sampler, you will virtually use a sample rate of double the speed, which will result in better fidelity. If anybody of you wants to see that in a video, I can do all these tricks in a video, but this one is already long enough, and I might have stressed your patience already enough with all the technobabble. I hope this overwhelming technical waterfall didn't scare you away. And thank you if you stayed with me this long. Leave a comment down below if you'd like to see a video in which I will use the Mirage and the aforementioned tricks from the manual and some more, like using pre-emphasis on sounds before recording them, or fooling the Mirage into a virtual sample rate of double the speed. Thanks for sharing your time with me. Please leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel and ring the bell so you won't ever miss a video on All About Keys.